Members of governing body, thank you very much. From the buzz that I could hear from my position, I think you've had very interesting and lively debates and discussions amongst each of you. For those of you who would like to come forward from your tables and pose questions, can I ask you to form a short queue either end? Can I also ask you, please, to begin by introducing yourself, giving your name and the diocese, etc., and also bearing in mind time, if we can be succinct and short. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tony Mullins, Llandaff, Ley. This is regarding safeguarding. I'm the Ministry Area Safeguarding Officer for our Ministry Area. I took a trip to Ireland, stayed in Castlebar for the last international. They were playing in Cardiff, but we had a great time in Ireland. And I was met by two people out in our group on the Sunday morning. Opposite our hotel was this beautiful figurine of Christ in the arms of Mary and a beautiful cemetery. And these chaps started berating the church and its history of abuse and cover-up, etc., etc. And I said, well, I told him what I did, where I went. I defended my faith. I said, I'm a safeguarding officer. We've got a very rigid and a stringent policy in Wales. Everyone is DBS trained. I said, I am sort of trained in the safeguarding procedure, DBS checked. And I said, we are aware that we can refer up the chain to the safeguarding team, which takes it out of the hands of clergy, and they then will deliberate and decide what to do about the particular case that we're concerned about. Now, my point is, and we had a huge debate, and there's lots of aspects of this, is that there's a current case being investigated, which I cannot mention and will not mention, but I flew home on the Monday, and the Welsh News was all about a historic case of one of the ex-bishops in Wales. And I said to my wife, you know, I was defending the church in Wales yesterday, and look at this. How do we defend our faith when these things are historically brought to light? And my challenge to the Archbishop and the bench of bishops is, if there are any known perpetrators of dastardly deeds within the church in Wales now, please expose and don't protect. You know, the fact that, you know, you may have a lay member who's a wonderful treasurer. Oh, what would we do if if the person has done something they shouldn't have? Expose them, report them, lift them up higher. And there was a lot of other members made contributions and about the level of abuse, be they vulnerable adults or young children. We have to make our congregations feel safe. That's the paramount effort and job I have in our church, which is supported by our MAC committee and by our priests. But I would ask through the Archbishop, down through bishops, archdeacons, whatever level of cleric you are, please, if they've done something wrong, get rid of them. Thank you.
Tony, thank you. Thank you for that. It wasn't an accident that I began with safeguarding. It was a very deliberate decision to front-end the most serious challenge, I think, that we face in the church at the moment. And there are two things I think I'd want to emphasize. The first is about credibility. And one of the ways in which we establish good credibility is by being very clear about past historic occasions and making sure that we deal with those properly. And you've already referenced some of the issues that we've had to face. It's a painful thing to do that, but it's necessary. The second thing is that we show that that same seriousness is present in the way in which we now conduct our affairs as a church in the present day. And there are things that I think that we still need to do further that our safeguarding team are helping us think through with greater focus. The first is, what does it look like to have a truly survivor-centered approach to safeguarding? to make sure that the voices of those who've suffered because of the church in Wales actually are not only cared for, but help shape our approach into the future. I think that's really important. We've done some good thinking, but there's much more to be done there. And the second thing is we need to cultivate what was put to me a while ago, a sense of professional curiosity. Do things look right? Why do we have a slight concern around something? And that's not to invite the church to become a kind of thought police organisation, but rather just to make sure that everyone understands that safeguarding is the golden thread that goes through all of our activity. As I said in my presidential address, if we fail here, we fail everywhere. Thank you for the question.
Next.
Robert Charlton, Swansea and Brecon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your address, Your Grace. This is a bit more positive, hopefully. More of a comment than a question. Can I refer, please, to the part of your address on the River Summit? And in it, you talked about the Church in Wales taking a lead as conveners and also encouraging collaboration. And I have an example to put before you, post-summit, of this collaboration. And this was from a delegate who attended the summit. She is County Councillor Jackie Charlton, who happens to be married to me, but nevertheless, she wanted me to put forward this to the governing body today. At the River Summit presentations resonated with me as the Cabinet member for a Greener Powys, overseeing nutrient management boards for both the Usk and Wye on behalf of the local authority. Powys is also crucial to the development of flood defences along the River Severn in Wales through the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme. The Severn rises in Powys and an important part of the culture of Montgomeryshire. Dirk Humry's presentation on upland peat restoration described a fund with little take-up, an opportunity for Powys, Wales' largest landmass local authority, that was previously unknown to us. Powys Economy and Climate team are now working to utilise this fund and collaborate with private investors for site protection across several moorlands and commons. This opportunity would not have been appreciated without attending this conference. Peatland on our uplands are crucial for carbon capture, nature-based flood solutions, and for biodiversity. These areas are under immense threat from climate change. This opportunity allows Powys County Council to play a crucial part in protecting this massive resource. And quite frankly, this would not have happened without your leadership and foresight when it comes to this particular summit. And we look forward to further leadership going forward. You mentioned about future summits as well. It is so important that we do focus on these type of issues. I'm not sure how many people saw the Western Mail a couple of weeks ago talking about the sewage discharges in Wales last year. I happen to live very near the River Usk, and it's appalling to read the official statistics that last year in the River Usk there were 648 sewage spillages into that river. And where I live, the river is essentially dead. So there's an awful lot of work to do going forward. So we have on the one hand Dirk Humry's positive contribution by helping with moorland and peatland, but of course then we get the negative side of them in regards to the awful sewage spillages that are continuing and ongoing. So I wanted to bring that before the governing body as a positive comment from someone who is a delegate there, that something fruitful is happening out of this summit, and we look forward to be able to go forward with this and report back later as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Just two things for governing body to know in addition to that. One is that the steering group that was set up to manage the summit, we've maintained our contact with one another so that we can continue to work together however and whenever it seems good. But also that document, which was the 5 points the First Minister wanted, we also created a slightly longer document, as you probably might know, that had 10 areas. And the purpose of distributing that is that we've got elections coming next year. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to think very carefully about how we use our votes. And one of the things I hope is to provide information to the church upon which decisions can be well-founded. And that, I think, is as far as I would want to go on that. We will all want to cast our vote responsibly, how we think appropriate. But the information that we can provide to help people make informed decisions seems to be a responsible way of responding beyond the summit into the future for the future of Wales.
Thank you.
Andy Grimwood, Archdeacon St Asaph. All it is that 18 months ago, Archbishop, you said in your presidential address that the #1 priority of the church in Wales is church growth, evangelism, mission. All we'd like to know on our table is, what are the explicit links between what you said today and that #1 priority, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. That's a great question. I think one of the things that I've seen in the Church Growth Fund's work is a maturing of 2 areas of life that are very, very important. One is the number of Tier 1 applications. And those Tier 1 applications have been extraordinarily varied. We've had people looking to refurbish a space which can be used for an act of worship that is very much on the pioneering front. And the breadth, as well as the depth that we're seeing from those applications, I think is an enormous testimony to the Church in Wales' resourcefulness and ability to think, as we often say, outside of the box. That's really important. But very often, those are things that are quite small in their delivery, and therefore, within that category 1, quite manageable. What I've been really impressed by are some of the larger scale, the really deep thinking that's taking place in a number of the applications we've seen. And I only mentioned 3 because I didn't want to say much more than that. But I can tell you there are significant things happening in the Gower as well. I'd love to talk to you about, perhaps Bishop John will on another occasion, about the way in which they're both seeking to utilise the space they have, which is an area that's rich with tourist attention, but drawing from history and seeking to provide, I think, a way of reaching those who have no contact with the church on a day-to-day basis with the good news of Jesus Christ. I wanted to say in my address that we ought not to pit what I've also seen are significant local developments where people, through children's family work, the kinds of things that are more familiar to us, we ought not to pit that aspect of our evangelism against the larger scale projects. They sit within the same church, and there's an exchange of information to be had about how we learn to do things well and together. I expect in the next year to see further Tier 2 applications. I know we will. And I expect to see an increase in Tier 1. And I think the greatest commendation to the church of what I said 18 months ago is that now the energy has moved to the governing body and to the whole church. People who are imagining and dreaming and wanting to prioritise this as a part of their work. We are normalising the work of evangelism. That's incredibly exciting. Thank you for the question.
Gareth Iwan, a dwi'n Ganon Lleug ym Mangor. Jyst chydig o sylwadau, gai ddiolch a cydnabod i ddechrau
I'd like to thank
y gyfeiriadaeth.
and acknowledge the reference to Welsh identity and legacy. When you were talking about Tryweryn and so on in your address, it hasn't been a part of the discussion in the Church in Wales very often over the years. So thank you for drawing attention to that part of our history. But I could see the discussion about AI was very interesting and very useful. And it comes down to the age-old question, what can we see? Is it real or is it not? Is it false or is it true? And what's factually true? But also the role of the church is to face the big question, what is the reality? And I think we've got a challenge there to interpret and to lead discussions on the big questions and the small ones about what is real today. It was great to see that ecumenism was on the agenda and in a very positive light. I would welcome that. Perhaps you could talk more about the summit in 2026, and also have you got an idea of what the focus of that conference will be?
Gareth, yn gyda diolch yn fawr am
Well, thank you
y cyfle i siarad am
for
pethau
the
Cymreig
opportunity Gareth said to talk about Welsh things.
Ma' pethau Cymreig
And
wedi dod yn bwysicach
I think the Welsh identity has become more important to all of us through Wales. It's great to see that the Welsh language is used now across the country, and I welcome this greatly.
O safbwynt AI,
With regards to
wedi
AI,
gweld yn newyddion
what we've
bod,
seen in the news,
ma' 'na stori
that
bod nath
we've
rywun creu stori
had-
ffug yn
we know
benodol,
that the
ac wrth
people
gwrs,
have created
yr
false
argraff
stories,
gath ei
false
ddod
news,
gan AI, oedd yn
and
rhan
the
o'r mater
AI played a part in that.
Google, i ni'n gweld
And of course on
AI
Google,
generated
you can
answers
see
yn nawr.
AI-generated
Ma' 'na
answers
grŵp
now.
sydd,
There is a
yn
group
bodoli yn yr eglwys
in the
yn
church in
A dwi'n
England,
rhan o'r grŵp
and I'm
yma sydd
part
yn
of this
edrych
church,
ar ffordd o dan,
looking,
arweinyddiaeth
it's
ysgol
under the
Rhydychen,
leadership of the
sydd yn
Bishop of
delio
Oxford,
gyda pethau moesol,
dealing
cymharu
with
ffordd yn
ethical
bosib i
questions and in which way
trio
we can
fod
try
yn
to
glir
be clear
am yr opsiynau
about
sydd o
all the
blaen ni,
options
safbwynt
that we have
fframwaith
within
ond
the
hefyd,
ethical framework of AI.
ble ydyn
But
ni'n
also,
anfon ein hymatebion ni?
where do we
At
send
pwy
our
ydy'n
responses?
cyfeirio
To
ein
who do we
sylwadau?
refer
Genedlaethau
our
undebol neu
comments?
rhywun arall ar hyn o bryd, dyw e ddim yn glir.
At the moment,
Dan
it's not
sylw sydd
clear,
rhywbeth,
but
da.
it is given
O safbwynt
consideration.
cenhedlaeth blwyddyn nesaf,
With the conference
beth
next
sy'n
year,
tarw fi yw
what struck me
gymaint
is
y pobl sydd yn
the
cytuno
people who
gyda'r
agree
eglwys
with the
bod
church
dyn ni eisiau creu
that we
cymdeithas
want
da,
to create a
bod
good
gwerthoedd
society that values
Cristnogol.
Christian
Mae
values.
rhan fwyaf o bobl
Most
siarad,
people
rhannu
will share
yr
them.
yr un gwerthoedd.
They share the same
Ydy'n bosib
values.
siarad i mewn
Can
lle
we
cyhoeddus
talk about them
sicrhau
in a public
bod
place
llais yr eglwys a
to
bod
make sure that the voice of the
yn cael ei
church
glywed gan
is
y
heard
llyfrgell? So,
by
ar hyn o
governments?
bryd,
At the
mae 'na
moment,
grŵp sydd yn
there's a group
rheoli ac yn gofalu
managing
dros yr
and
agenda
looking
dros
after
y
the
dyddiad eto.
agenda.
Does
There's
na
no
ddim teitl,
date or a
ond
title
yn y
yet,
maes mwy na lai
but it will
am
be to
be
do
ydy'r cymdeithas
more or
da
less
yng Nghymru.
with what does a good society look like in Wales. That's the working title for the moment.
Rebecca Sperry, clerical rep from St Asaph. So we discussed a lot of the benefits of using AI, but we were really concerned by the ecological impact of AI. Particularly, one ChatGPT is equivalent of 10 times the energy of one Google search, and that AI in general uses more energy than one country. And we just wondered how that fits in with the church that's working towards sort of being net zero, working towards, looking after rivers.
There's just been a debate, hasn't there, in the last 48 hours about whether or not we're going to experience a significant shift in the way in which we understand our drive towards net zero. So Tony Blair has joined others in suggesting that we need to move towards carbon capture rather than reducing our dependence upon fossil fuels. So there's a really big debate which lies behind your question. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do, but there's no reason why those two should be in conflict. I think developing technology which mitigates the current, if I can use the word, systems of pollution, I think is critical. But at the same time, if we're not going to be serious in this country about our own fossil fuel usage and our own move towards net zero, it becomes very difficult for that point to be made more widely in our world if we're not doing it ourselves. It's about credibility. So my pitch to all of us is to be as vigilant and to be as venturesome in our attempts to be serious about the way in which we personally and our societies and the way in which we cast our votes next year actually occasion a change for the better in the way in which we see this whole area. Thank you.
Ruth Coombs, Llandaff Co-opted Cleric. We had a really interesting discussion on our table about safeguarding, so kind of returning and looking at the left-hand end, whereas Tony was looking at the right-hand end. And we were kind of talking about, and would like some, I think some clarity or some insights as to what does it mean to have professional curiosity. We want to have safe spaces, safer church, and it's not easy. And we were just wondering how we can move from, we heard this morning about being affective to effective. How does that sit in this space? And how do we shift the culture? Because if we've got great processes in place here, but we're not doing anything on the left-hand end, then we're failing in some way. And we need to overcome that culture of deference, and we need to be kind of changing behaviours. And so how can we make that a reality? So yes, we've got processes for if we need them, but actually they're on a shelf because we don't need them, because we've got it all left-hand loaded. And what can we learn from each other? What can we learn from the different dioceses? What can we learn from other places? And what can we learn from people who've got it right over decades of trying in the secular world? People like Nazir Al-Sam, for example, who's done so much work in this space. And we can learn from them as well as learning from each other in the church. So we'd really appreciate some more attention and praying on that left-hand end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I've been so impressed that our own safeguarding team takes so seriously their own professional development. So they're in very close contact with other agencies and can themselves be shaped by, informed and developed in a way that enables them to work even more effectively with us. That's a sign of their professionalism. I think I would separate two things out, if I may. The first is the relationship between culture and behaviour. And one of the reasons why policies are so important, let's cast our minds back to 5, 7, 10 years ago, when, first of all, we needed to start making progress around training. So many people heard, as we said, you must be trained, heard, I'm not trustworthy. I'm not being trusted. That's why I have to go on training. And it was a big cultural move for us to be able to say, no one is accusing anyone, but we all need to demonstrate that we have a safe environment by virtue of our training operations. Now, I think we've made enormous progress here, and the statistics will bear that out. The majority of people who ought, not entirely, but ought to be trained, are being trained. Attending modules A, B, and C, and whichever ones they need to. That's really important because it templates into our life a certain level of expectation. And it's significant because you affect culture slowly, much more slowly than you do through establishing protocols or policies. They take time to land. So I think the second thing about developing a culture is, as I indicated in my address, what I don't think we're doing is we're not wanting to set up cameras in people's homes or in churches. But 10 years ago, if something didn't seem right, we might have been constrained and said, oh, I won't ask. Now I think we need to develop a non-threatening kind of approach which says, I'm just going to ask a question here. Is everything all right? Is this as it should be? What's taking place here? Are we sure that this is right? Those kinds of questions now are, I think, landing more easily because we're learning the language which previously eluded us. And I think that's what lies behind the professional curiosity. It's not the curiosity of the professionals. It's the curiosity which is professional to the organisation, which we need to adopt to ensure that the cement as well as the bricks are actually in place. I think we're making progress here, but I think there is more to be done. And maybe it's one of the questions that we ought to refer to our team, which was, what does developing professional curiosity look like in a normal mission or ministry area? And that would be really worthwhile. One last thing. I've had really positive conversations with the director of safeguarding about this, because one of the things I think we could really usefully do is an event that involves 40, 50 or 60 children in a mission or ministry area. That's a really good occasion. It's got everything that we would expect to see. The drinks, the entertainment, the organisation, the oversight, and the safeguarding. And if we can showcase what good events look like that are properly safeguarded, I think that incentivizes and allows people to see how we can manage this better than we currently are. There are issues, I think, around capacity of our team to help us do that, but no one has said that's a bad idea. And I hope that we can, in the next months, actually show some really good examples of where the church is doing it well. Thanks, Ruth.
Mark Brees, elected member of Llandaff Diocese. The table on which I was sat focused discussion really on two areas in terms of rivers and the work with rivers. We thought this was a really good initiative and a good thing for the Church of Wales to be involved with, but also that we should be raising the hard questions and pushing rather than just simply getting people together. So that's a good thing. We were then hugely encouraged by the discussions and comments around ecumenism. We were inspired by Archbishop Mark's homily this morning, and this may be the first time that he speaks to us. We hope it's not the last. And indeed, in terms of leaders of other denominations in Wales, similarly, hopefully we will hear more from them. A note of caution, we hope that we just hear a lot about ecumenism, that we're actually doing it as well as talking about it. It was suggested that for some, even just working in a ministry area is ecumenical enough. So we want to go further than that and hope that in terms of ministry areas in some dioceses, that working together as groups of Anglican churches does not detract from working with our other Christian brothers and sisters. Overall, we felt inspired and encouraged. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Can I just say a word about the ecumenical dimension? And like you, I was very inspired by Archbishop Mark's sermon to us today, and by Cynan's leadership in Katina has been enormously generative of a new spirit. The fact that we are able to retreat and pray together is quite remarkable. We've always had good opportunities to do things together. Perhaps we've not understood them to be ecumenical. But if I tell you that today the levels of poverty in Wales are greater than they have been since the Victorian period, that is not an exaggeration. When I tell you that the cost of living crisis is just a smidgen beneath what it was when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that statistic comes from the national agency, the National Energy Action Group, you'll see that we face enormous challenges. Now, the only way that I think we can do these pieces of ministry which are laden with compassion but are transformative is when we do it together. Now, those opportunities have always been there, but it just takes the mindset that says truly we can do together better than we could apart the things that are incumbent upon us. So my commendation of the ecumenical venture is not only for us to be in good conversation, prayer together, but for us to be really alive to Wales today and the challenges that we face. We will be so much the better if we do that together. And this afternoon, we're going to be inspired by a speaker who will show us what human love for the most marginalised will look like. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Richard Woods, elected Bangor, our table's chosen lamb to the slaughter. We have 3 questions. The first, we welcomed the focus on safeguarding and professionalism around it. We wonder, Archbishop, if you'd like to comment on the recent release of the Standing Doctrinal Commission's report, Walking in Integrity, about authority and its use and misuse in the church, and how it can contribute to a safer culture in the church in Wales. The vast majority of us around the table weren't even aware it had been published, and we're sure it has something that can contribute to that increase in professionalism. Also, though, the delivery of that increased professionalism within safeguarding and the desire for more ministerial safeguarding officers. I know many ministeriaries are struggling to find and to recruit a safeguarding officer, and we wonder if there is guidance and advice out there, perhaps even a job description or role description that we're unaware of because we haven't seen one, or if there is one in development so that ministeriaries can more easily find their own ministerial safeguarding officers. And lastly, possibly picking up a little bit on Andy Grimwood's question, but phrasing it slightly differently, we noted at the end how the age of the saints, the church was alert to a number of things, and you highlighted the danger of drift. And we wonder whether or not our church is or needs to be aware of the danger of drift for us at the moment, and whether or not you would respond well to a 6th invitation to be a more focused church.
Grace?
The Walking in Integrity report is a very significant piece of work, and there are people within this room who've contributed to that enormously, and I want to thank them publicly for their work. And I think, Richard, it gets us to the heart of one of the most challenging aspects around safeguarding, because it's all about the close contact that we have with people, particularly in the arena of healing and of prayer, and also of the use of power. And I think one of the things that report has done has simply said to the church, we need to be very alive to the issues of power and control. And are we conscious and alive to the dynamics that are taking place in any pastoral situation? Now, that report, I think, needs for another piece of work beneath it to provide some kind of guidelines, which will themselves probably need refining in due course. What that report does is that it surfaces that this is an area which we've been aware of for some time is potentially sensitive, and we haven't developed our protocols well, and it's invited us to do that. So I don't think I can see any more than that, anything more granular or specific. But I can assure you that that piece of work will take place. And it sits within partly a safeguarding, partly a ministerial environment, which is why those two areas of our life will need to be working in tandem, one with another. A really significant piece of work to be done. This afternoon or tomorrow, can't remember when question time is, there will be an issue which is raising question time around ministry area safeguarding officers. Of course, one of the things that is good about the mission and ministry area is that it allows us not to have just a safeguarding officer to each church, but to that other unit, which is very, very helpful. Personally, I don't like the idea of having a MASO across different mission or ministry areas. I suspect that it will be difficult to exercise that ministry, that piece of work, when one is removed geographically from one area and from the churches within it. That's my personal view. I would much prefer to see one MASO to each mission and ministry area. There is a job description, but I'm not sure why it's not available, because I've seen it. So it ought to be available and online. Hooray.
In the safeguarding policies and procedures, in the first PDF introduction to safeguarding, there is a list of key responsibilities of a MASO on page 16.
Oh, don't you love assessors? Thank you, Matthew. That's really helpful. And thank you particularly for the question around drift, Richard, because that was, again, a very deliberate and well-chosen word. And I think the church is always called to two things. One is to be truly Catholic in its faith and in its ordering. We are inheritors of things that take us all the way back, we believe, to the ministry of the apostles, and have sought to found our life on the treasures and the things that they have vouchsafed across the years to us. But also to be truly apostolic, to be really committed to evangelism, really committed to transforming what is unjust. And there is always a temptation, I think, for a church to lose sight of both of those. We live now, I think, in what would be recognised as a largely secular environment. And that's got to shift the way in which we understand how those two key elements of our life land well and are preserved. And in the mission and ministry area, it is about creating a Eucharistic community, people who in word and sacrament are shaped by Jesus Christ. It is about the way in which we take responsibility for our area, for making sure that our churches are open and available for people in baptisms, in funerals, in weddings, but also how we are alive to the gospel. Those who know not or love not the Lord Jesus actually have an opportunity to hear good news. It's something that we ought never to lose. And so I wanted to make sure that we understood there can and there must not be any drift from those two pivots or pillars of our life as a church. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you.
Kevin Ellis, Bangor Diocese elected. Thank you, Archbishop. We, on our table, loved the reference that you made to listening, because we think as listening is holy and a prophetic and pastoral act that the church needs to be more deeply engaged with. In terms of our internal life, a call perhaps to listen again to the different communities of the pioneer and parochial streams, which are, in one sense, is a false dichotomy, but a commitment to listening, but also listening when we listen to the conversation within our society, acknowledging that there are fairly major debates on, say, end-of-life care, that we as a church have something to offer, not least because although there's disagreement, we are sometimes very good at being people who can hold diverse views and still respect each other, and might therefore provide a model for those outside.
Thank you, Kevin. Listening, I think in relation to the primary issue that was in the presidential address, we had said to governing body, or we had agreed with governing body, the bishops would undertake an exercise in hearing where we were. And that was because we wanted our discernment to be shared. We wanted not only to provide an opportunity for the church to confer and to hear from one another, but take together as best we can the kind of decisions which lay out into the future where we might see ourselves going in relation to the one of the most contentious and difficult and painful issues as a church that we will have to deal with. I've been profoundly impressed by our church. The willingness of people from very different places, not only courteously in their discourse, but patient in their listening, not only to words, but the things that lie beneath the words as well. And that in itself is a different way of doing decision making. It should inform the outcome, but as a way of modelling and of practicing what I see written large in the pages of the New Testament, which I think at times might have been quite sparky, but at the end of the day, a deep commitment in their wrestling to hear from one another and to hear from the Spirit of God, so that together we make decisions. And that's why I think the model the bishops have urged upon us is absolutely the right one for us into the future. I hope and pray that it will be as transformative for you as Bishop David and I found it was for us in Bangor Diocese.
Chris Dearden, elected to the Order of Laity from Bangor Diocese. Chair, two bits of feedback from our table. The first is to say that we've already taken the liberty of ordering the Archbishop a new mitre with the slogan, "Make Ceredigion great again." There's a spare for Dorian if needed as well, of course. More importantly, I suppose, just to say we're in a room with no windows, just about here. It's very easy to talk about our church in abstract at the governing body. We just wanted to know, how should our congregations see us being more professional, grounded, compassionate, connected and creative?
Thank you.
The landing well, Chris, is a really good point that you've made. It's absolutely critical. How do we move from a church that whose ministry and decisions are attained within the life of the governing body, but don't find their way back into the ministry areas? And part of that is, I think, information exchange, but part of it is the other way around as well, isn't it? Which is that we need the governing body to be engaged and serious about hearing of the realities that take place on the ground, and particularly for mission and ministry area ministers to be able to say to us, these are the things that are alive and really, really important within the life of the church. It's all very well, Bishop, you talking about this, that, and the other. That's not what it's like on the ground. And I think that seamless connection between the ground and, I suppose, the structures that exist is always something to which we must be attentive. Two things that I think are really worthwhile mentioning in this context. First of all, our work with church schools. It's absolutely vital that we continue to support our church schools, because we bring ourselves into contact with children of all ages. And we want inevitably to be people who hear and are shaped. When I was consecrated Archbishop, one of the things that was put to me was, tell us the things that are really important. And that's why we need to grow new ears to listen well to the things that are really important at ground zero. And the second thing is, Pope Francis was surely right, wasn't he, when he said, Archbishop Mark reminded us of this morning, his first missive was about joy. Being alive and joyful in the faith is a way in which we cascade good news across our whole church. And I think if we are known not only by our scars, but known by our joyfulness, I think that that is going to be the most transforming of all things within our life together. I'm going to reflect further on your question because I'm not sure that I've quite got it right, but I think those two things are good starting points.
Archbishop, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your we will break now for our lunch, which will be served in the Orme Suite. Can I ask you, please, to return to the room and ready for us to resume the afternoon session at 2:15? Yeah. And may I ask the Venerable Paul Mackiness to kindly take the chair when we resume after lunch for agenda item 7, please. Thank you.